Hello. In this video, we're going to be looking at Christianity in China from 1949 to today. So you'll recall we talked about how that there was this missionary effort to help support China, and this could be seen through things like the Life magazine, which was not controlled by missionaries but by people sympathetic to China and to the Protestant missions, especially in China. And this effort to get the Chinese government support from the United States. And the Chinese government, and it's called the nationalist government, I'm going to use that term later on, the nationalist government, it's led by Chiang Kai-shek. And they are successful. Eventually, with significant Chinese help, Japan is defeated in World War II. We don't like to, unfortunately, we don't, I think, talk about the Chinese contribution to the war enough. But China lost a lot of people fighting Japan. The United States, we would have had a much harder fight if it wasn't for the efforts of the Chinese. So there's a lot of hope in 1945. Once Japan is defeated, now you've got this nationalist government that is seen as friendly to Christianity, right? It's led by Chiang Kai-shek and his wife, who are baptized Christians. There's a lot of hope for this. You may remember, though, I also mentioned how you've got this rising sense that communism is the way to go, and there are Chinese communists. And what's going to happen is, after World War II, there's going to be a civil war between the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Mei-ling, or his wife Sun Mei-ling. I said led by them both. She's actually very political, so I think it is appropriate to mention that, though she doesn't have an official position. But the nationalists are, the head is a Chinese Christian, and they're fighting the communists in a civil war over what is going to be in charge of China. Is it going to be this nationalist government, which it's kind of a dictatorship, but it does eventually want to become more like the United States, it would seem, and have an actual republic or and liberal democracy. And on the other side, you have communism. They have a civil war that lasts until 1949. And in 1949, the communists are going to be victorious. Right? And this is a poster or an image from that time period featuring the leader of the communists, Mao Zedong. And you can see there are a lot of the posters dedicated to him, but the communists are going to win. Now, this creates a challenge for Christianity for multiple reasons. Communism is officially an atheistic doctrine. Typically, to be a member of the Communist Party, you need to be an atheist. Like, that's required. So that's kind of an issue. And the government that is in charge now is a party state. So that means that it's a state governed, dominated, and led by one party, the Communist Party. And like I just said, you have to be an atheist to be a member of the Communist Party. And it understands and says we have the right to rule, not because you voted us in, but because we have the correct ideology, which is an ideology that is materialistic. And I don't mean materialistic, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say materialistic. Materialist, not materialistic. Materialistic is like if you just like to buy like stuff and you want it, your life is based around buying stuff. Materialist is this view that the only thing that exists is matter. There's no such thing as spirits and ghosts and God and that kind of thing. So you've got, if you're a Christian, this could be kind of an issue because you've got this party state governed by atheists who say that there is no such thing as God, like that's their official stance. This government is an authoritarian, and it doesn't rule because people voted it in. It rules because it won a civil war, and it says we don't have to have votes, essentially, because we have the correct ideology. That's why we're in power. That's why we're the only party allowed. And it's an authoritarian government, meaning it has the right to tell you what to do, and it's totalitarian, which means that it can tell you what to do in a lot of different ways. Right? It claims to be able to speak to your total life. So if you're a Christian, this kind of makes you a little nervous. But there are some things that may make you think like, okay, maybe it's a little bit safe. And I'll kind of go back and forth here, so please bear with me. But I do want to point out just real quick, this is from 2020. It's interesting. I don't know how they differentiate atheist and agnostic here. I'd like to see how the questions are answered because I would have figured there would be more atheists than agnostics there. But in any case, you do see there is about 7% Christian. Now, it's always hard to get that number right in terms of religion, but I do want to highlight that there is a significant minority of Christians in China. It's not a huge number, but also remember, when we're talking about a country like 1.5 billion people or so, 7% of that's a lot of people, right? So here's the thing. What's tricky about this religious freedom in China, there is a constitution in China, but it's understood that you don't have inalienable rights. You only get rights if you're basically agree with the government. If you're considered a reactionary or a rightist or not part of the people, rights only belong to the people. And if you're not part of the people, you get in trouble, you lose your rights. So this is kind of a tricky thing. You can't really complain to the government that your rights are being violated, especially because there's not independent courts or the rule of law. Now, there is religious freedom in the Chinese, and I'm talking about the old Chinese constitution. I'm focusing on the one from I think it's 54. There's religious freedom for specific religions. And that's what's interesting is they're very clear about who gets religious freedom. And in alphabetical order, it's Buddhism, Catholicism, Taoism, Islam, Protestantism. Right. So you've got these 5 religions that are there, and it's interesting that Catholicism and Protestantism are considered completely different religions. It's not. You may have someone from China might ask, "Are you Catholic or are you Christian?" Because sometimes the word for Protestant, this happens in Korea too, is just translated as Christian, which always kind of drives me nuts. I always have to say no in English. It's are you Catholic or Protestant? And like I said before, only atheists can be Communist Party members. So there's kind of a mixed bag here. If you're a Christian coming into this situation, on one side, you would probably prefer in many ways that, your head of your government is Christian, but, you can live without a non-Christian head. But it's kind of nervous when it's a party that says atheism is the way to go, instead of just saying, well, we don't take a position. It says, no, atheism is the way to go. And we're in charge because we have the right doctrine, which is atheism and this kind of idea of a materialist view of the world. It's going to make you nervous. At the same time, you have a constitution that does say you do have the right to exist. So it's not quite clear what you should do. And that's my point here. If this has been confusing, good in a sense, because the point here is that if you're a Christian living in 1949, 1950s China, it is confusing. There are things that you could look at and say, not sure what to do about this. This is bad. This is good. Not clear. So I think it's interesting. You could have, this is a poster from 1951. All believers should spread the gospel. This is from 1951 when the communists take over in 1949. So there's a kind of confidence among some Christians in China that, yeah, we can deal with this. We can deal with this. We can be out there sharing Christianity. We have religious freedom. We're all good. So we need to now, though, talk about, there's this division then among Christians in China over how to respond to all this. And it's important to note that these take part in some conflicts that we already have. So remember, I had this basic question: what does it mean to be Christian in China? How do we, if we're Chinese Christians, if we're missionaries, how do we try and improve our image? How do we make Christianity Chinese while still staying Christianity? How do we do this? And it shouldn't be surprising that people disagreed about how to do this. Right? Christians, missionaries had different answers. Chinese Christians had different answers, and so on and so forth. There was conflict about how to do this. And one man who was a part of this was a man who was, Chinese name was Wu Yaozong, but he went by YT Wu. And this was kind of, they often went by initials just to make things easier for Westerners who didn't speak Chinese. And Wu Yaozong, YT Wu, had to deal with this kind of question, right? How do we make sense of the communists coming to power? How do we deal with that? And here's the thing about him, though. He said this is kind of a good thing, right? He was interested in the social gospel, which is this idea that Christians need to be really, really active in taking care of people in this world, in society, right? We bring the gospel into society. Jesus went out and helped the poor, so we should do the same thing. That's kind of the idea. And we can do that through charity and institutions, but also through laws, supporting laws that help the poor, through social campaigns and things like that. He was nervous about ideas of individual salvation. He saw that as in conflict. He said Christians should not only be concerned about getting saved, they need to be concerned about society. And you put those two things together, and you get someone who was often sympathetic with the communists, especially because he himself often fought with Protestant missionaries. He saw many Protestant missionaries, he himself was Protestant, as wanting to have too much control over China. And he said, look, the gospel has been in China in its Protestant form for over 100 years. Back off. Let us do our thing, right? That was kind of his basic attitude. We Chinese need to decide fundamentally what Chinese Christianity is, right? And so he works with the communists as they come to power. He sees the rise of communism as a good thing. We're concerned about the poor. The communists are concerned about the poor. The communists aren't concerned so much with individual salvation, and I wasn't too interested in that anyway. So he's going to work with communists as they come to power. They have similar goals from his perspective. And he doesn't much like the missionaries, so he will support this thing called the Three Self Declaration. And the idea is that churches in China, and I want to be careful here, especially Protestant churches, he's focused on Protestantism. Remember, the 5 religions, Protestantism, Catholicism, are different religions. Three self-declaration. Churches should be self-governing, meaning they should not be controlled by the missionaries. They should be self-supporting, meaning they shouldn't get money from missionaries. And they should be self-propagating, meaning they should spread Christianity themselves. They don't need foreign missionaries. From the communist perspective, this makes a lot of sense. We don't want foreign influence. We connect missionaries with imperialism. We don't want Chinese churches doing what Western missionaries tell them to do. We don't want them to be under Western control because whoever controls money controls the church, in a sense. We don't want them to be sending missionaries to China. We want Chinese people to do that. So this is something that will YTU supports because he thinks that Chinese should be in charge of Christianity in China, and it goes along with what the communists want. So you've got this. And this will eventually lead to what's called the Three Self-Patriotic Movement Church, or TSPM. And this is kind of the official Christian church in China. Its status will change over time, but basically this is government-recognized Christianity. And I want to stress, sometimes people kind of see the TSPM as like fake Christianity. It's not real Christianity because they're working with the communists. And I don't think that's quite fair to people like YTU or many other Chinese who thought it was a good idea. For many Chinese, the nationalists, even though the Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Mei-ling were Christians, were not doing a good job of living out a Christian life. Remember, Chiang Kai-shek was still a very brutal guy. He was basically a dictator. And so they saw the communists as being more able to bring real social and economic improvements to China. So they were willing to support that. And they also did not like that they felt that the missionaries were exercising too much control. Now, there's a fundamental problem here, as we're going to see. And I want to be careful. I'm not trying to criticize YTU here. When you, in the past, now knowing what we know that this was not going to end well for, in many respects, for the Christians involved. They thought that they were making a deal with the communists, but that's not how communism works. Communism is an authoritarian, totalitarian government style of government. I know the government's supposed to disappear, but when that happens, we can talk about it. Sorry, it's always the same. It's like, well, that's not real communism. It's like, yeah, but it always ends up looking the same. These organizations are under communist control. And they can't say, wait a second, we think that you are misunderstanding Christianity. You're telling us to do this, but we don't think we should do that. Or you're telling us we should believe this way. We don't think we should believe this way. The government can say, we don't care. Do it. Believe it. So that's kind of a problem, right? And when YTU and these people, these Chinese Christians, when they did this, they thought that the government was going to keep its end of the bargain. It's not interested in doing that. But basically what happened when the communists came in power in China, they would be nice to everyone and then pick off their enemies, the people they distrusted, one by one. And fundamentally, remember, this is an organization that sees Christianity as dangerous. And so, of course, they're going to try and limit it. So to give you another kind of different view, as we saw from those posters, the social gospel, what YT Yong supported, or YTU, I'm sorry, what he supported, that was becoming increasingly dominant in China missions. This idea that individual salvation isn't important. What is important is going out and transforming society in a Christ-like way to kind of bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. And you had some people like YTU who thought that was great. You had other people like Wang Mingdao who thought it was bad. And what's interesting is he would agree with YTU in some ways. So, for example, he thought that the missionary churches were bad in many respects. He thought they were corrupt. And in fact, he would be rebaptized. Now, I've heard different interpretations of this because this can mean two things. One interpretation is that he had been baptized just with sprinkling. And he became convinced, one interpretation is that he became convinced that baptism didn't work because it should be by full immersion. So he accepted like a Baptist view that baptism has to be by full immersion. So he was rebaptized, which means that he was rejecting the baptism that he had formerly received and saying it's not a true baptism. So that's pretty controversial. Another interpretation is even more controversial, more radical, is he just said, this church is so corrupt, they could not have baptized me properly, so I'm going to be rebaptized myself. That's even stronger view. But in any case, this is someone who, like YTU, was rejecting missionary understandings of Christianity to a large respect. So missionaries are in charge too much. Chinese Christians need to be in charge of Chinese Christianity. However, unlike YTU, he was an anti-liberal. He did not like the social gospel, thought it was bad. Like I said, he was anti-missionary. He was a fundamentalist. He was apocalyptic. He thought the world was going to end soon, and he was under Pentecostal influence. So very different from YTU. YTU is much more scholarly, much more of a philosopher, theologian. Wang Mingdao is primarily a preacher who is, I'm not trying to say his ideas were shallow or something like that, but he's more interested in going out and converting people and preaching to them in this kind of fiery language. And he refused to be part of the three self-patriotic movement churches and was imprisoned from 1955 to 1980 for that belief. So we have this division among Chinese Christians, right? They can agree on some things. We think Chinese Christianity should be run by the Chinese people. But on the other side, you've got people like you've got YTU who says social gospel, liberal, work with the communists. You've got people like Wang Mingdao who said, nope, social gospel is bad. Get back to the fundamentals. Apocalypse is coming. I'm not going to work with the three self-patriotic movement. I'm not going to work with the government. And what ends up happening is the government actually tries, it's very complex, but the government in China in 1979 becomes a bit more open and tries to release him from prison. And he says, I'm not leaving prison until you say you were wrong to imprison me. And then basically he was kind of tricked into leaving. I'm not quite sure how that worked. But he said, I was tricked, darn it. I didn't want to leave prison because they never said I was wrong. And, or they never said I was right. And basically he was taking a position similar to St. Paul, who didn't want to leave prison until it was proved that he was in the right. But this guy was tricked out. And one thing I want to report, he's seen as essential in the development of house churches in China. Right? He's seen as someone who helps to lead this idea of having these movements in China of people meeting privately in people's homes. So outside of the official government-run church. And this creates this very complex situation in China where we have this so-called like official church and underground church. And it gets complicated because some people can be in both at the same time. It gets really complicated. But the idea here I'm just trying to show how Chinese Christianity is changing. There's this new government that insists on having more authority over the church. Some Christians think that's a good thing. They try and work with the government. Others think it's a bad thing. They are going to be imprisoned. So powerful government. It's going to be difficult to survive in this for Christianity in many respects.